Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Mastena Nazarian, an Alexander Technique teacher in Melbourne, Australia. Mastena has been experimenting with a new variant on Alexander Technique directing, and we're going to talk a little bit about what inspired her to do that and what she's come up with from that. Mastena, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Robert.
Well, and it's always a pleasure talking to you. This is probably our fourth or fifth conversation, right? Um, you mentioned that you had read something in Pedro de la Contra's books, one of his books, both of his books, and that's what got you started on this. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Pedro and I met in Brisbane, Australia. I think it was back in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
And then recently, last year, he came for a visit to my training school. I was just finishing up my training here in Melbourne. And so there was a week of lessons and workshops and very quite engaging work that he does, if anyone has had the opportunity to work with him.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a side, I've also been doing Skype coaching with him that I highly recommend.
Mm-hmm.
And he was doing private lessons, 15-minute turns with students, and then group workshops. He's a fantastic group workshop facilitator for anyone who's wanting to learn more about how to teach the Alexander technique or aspects of the technique, both to musicians and non-musicians in the group setting.
Mm-hmm.
I highly suggest that you seek him out.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he introduced something in his lessons which he called the simplified skeleton,
Mm-hmm.
and it's prominent in his new version of his book, Indirect Procedures, and also in his the one before that, Integrated Practice. Um, so I'll just read a couple of sentences, very short sentences from where he introduces this in his book.
Mm-hmm.
The simplified skeleton is a practical way for you to sense yourself in action. I offer it not as an anatomical and physiological construct, but as a tool that is used even if some of its features might seem vague and ambiguous to the scientifically minded. So it's basically a practical tool that you can use to um, sharpen your kinesthetic sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I've been using it.
Mm-hmm.
And during the first week, well, the week that he was here, I started sort of seeing him in lessons with other sort of public lessons in the school with other trainees. And he introduced it almost to everyone. He would
Mm-hmm.
go up to the skeleton and he would say the following: the neck belongs to the spine, the shoulders belong to the back, the pelvis belongs to the spine.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, other stuff would come up.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very sort of kind of simple and fresh approach. And I started experimenting that with myself. So I would say to myself, the neck belongs to the spine, and I would immediately become aware of how I was actually holding my neck. I
Mm-hmm.
would immediately become aware of the tightening of my head back and down.
Mm-hmm.
So before I would give those directions, I would have probably been marrying the neck to the head.
Right. Yeah.
So creating unnecessary, a lot or a little, it doesn't matter how much, compression between the head and neck joint.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say the neck belongs to the spine, so that the head has improved options for movement and ease of movement. And then I would say, okay, let's try let the neck be free, and it just wouldn't work as well. It
Hmm.
was just unbelievable how much this sort of neutral way of directing uh, was more was just working for me.
Yeah. Well, of course, saying I'm going to let my neck be free, which is a pretty classic Alexander direction, does have this fundamental problem that it assumes you know how to do it. I mean, that's where negative directions really
Yeah,
help out. And I guess when you're saying, I'm just thinking as we're talking, when you affirm that you're saying my neck belongs to my spine, you're really just affirming the reality of the situation.
yeah, it's
I mean,
fantastic.
the neck is just is a mental construct. It is part of the spine, right? I mean, it's the
Yeah.
last seven vertebrae. So it sounds like it's you affirming to yourself something about the reality of your structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Now,
the
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, how about the second one? That was shoulders. Say that one again.
The shoulders belong to the back.
Mm-hmm.
So I would notice myself, or I just noticed myself that just semi-second ago, uh, holding the weight of my head using my shoulder muscles,
Mm-hmm.
or the big movers of my back, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
and pulling my shoulders towards each other,
Mm-hmm.
as in the shoulder girdle, front and back and sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so the shoulders belong to the back, reaffirms the first part, and also um, creates more space in the back. So I suppose lengthening and widening, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
but
what's your interpretation of what back means in this case?
um, what my interpretation? It's a starting point that's sort of multi-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but from my experience with Aikido and playing the guitar and um, lots of different daily activities, I'm becoming a firm believer that when Alexander used uh, let the back lengthen and widen,
Mm-hmm.
it just there's something really, really rich about how the back part of our torso responds to our nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of my beloved teachers, Kathy Madden, one time introduced the idea that maybe he couldn't say body because that was a sort of a Victorian kind of connotations, that it was kind of you couldn't say body.
Mm-hmm. You could
That
barely
that
say legs.
but but the more I work on it for myself, from I suppose a personal experience of it, um, back
Mm-hmm.
seems to be kind of a powerful
Mm-hmm.
way into the nervous system, because also as a whether someone is got the body image issues, if you start talking about their whole torso and the front and
Mm-hmm.
sternum and all of that stuff, I think it goes more into the emotional center unnecessarily, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Whereas if I say the shoulders belong to the back, it seems to affect the arms and the front and the pelvic area as well, but indirectly.
So
So
maybe if someone didn't have the kind of issues you were talking about,
yeah,
you could say shoulders belong to your torso. Maybe
yes,
I don't know. I mean, this would be worth
yeah,
exploring. But
yeah,
what you're saying is that yeah, that raises a little can of worms for some people. So why not
Hmm.
connect it to the back, which is going to amount to a certain
Yeah.
extent the same thing, but it's going to avoid the pitfalls.
Yeah. Maybe in a moment I'll sort of introduce another reason why I think these directions work for me.
Okay.
And
Well, let's do the
and
third one. A pelvis. What was it? The pelvis belongs to the spine.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I may be walking across the room and habitually moving my legs
Mm-hmm.
from my pelvis
Mm-hmm.
rather than from the joints of the leg that respond into the pelvis.
Mm-hmm.
So by asserting the fact that the pelvis actually is connected to the tail,
Mm-hmm.
it creates more options and more freedom for the movement of the leg.
Mm-hmm.
And
So it's affirming a reality there as well, right?
yeah, and also I'll just go back to the shoulders belong to the back. It's affirming a reality, and it allows more mobility and stability in the use of the arms. And I think what's fantastic about this simplified skeleton, and again, he says it's a practical way for you to sense yourself in action, is that being a musician, I've we did quite a lot of practice of the simplified skeleton directions, I suppose. That's how they sort of assert themselves for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to do it sort of quite quickly
Mm-hmm.
and see improvement in my attention, in my breathing, in overcoming my habitual patterns quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So
And you've come up with a name for the this what was it, neutral directions? Is that what you referred to it as? This
yeah,
process. I mean,
yeah,
that's your term, right?
yeah, that's my turn.
Well, well, you got to get credit for that. I mean, that might, as we were talking earlier before the podcast, and we're talking in October 2013. This is an astonishingly fertile period for innovations in Alexander technique. I guess you could call it self-directing technology. I mean, there
Mm,
have been just the most amazing developments in the last 4 or 5 years, and in particular, I would say in the last year. And
right.
this could be one of those. It's like there's a whole new choice of ways to self-direct that I think pretty much all are superior in one way or another to more classic versions,
Mm,
which I think are were great for their time.
mm,
They help people a lot, but they
mm,
have serious internal limitations, and
mm.
I think we're learning how to overcome those. And in the process, it seems to me that we're getting simpler and simpler and more effective at the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
time. It is really,
yeah,
we are in the most amazing period of,
yeah.
until the next amazing period. Who knows what that's going to be?
Yeah, I
So,
have actually have a haiku version of these
oh, go for
simplified.
it. Go for it.
Uh, can you?
Yeah.
So let me just get. Would your listeners mind if I get my haiku in front of me?
No, I
Just
think
one
you should
second.
have it right there.
Okay, just a second.
And I'll fill up the airspace by just saying that I'm speaking with Mastena Nazarian, a teacher in Melbourne, Australia, and we're discussing a whole new development in Alexander technique directing. You back?
Yes, I'm back.
Excellent. Haiku time.
Haiku time.
Yeah.
So neck belongs to spine, shoulders belong to the back, hips belong to spine. So I just sort of made it into a 575 haiku there.
Uh huh.
And uh, uh, for better or worse, I suffer from periodic bouts of insomnia. So I do the very long version when I'm sort of trying to settle myself and get a little bit more rest, which we've had perhaps sort of running out of time to
No,
talk
we've
about
got
now.
to do the long version, and then we'll
The
bring
long
it
version,
to
okay.
do, give
All
us the
right.
long version.
And sometimes I practice it. I live in an apartment, so sometimes I practice it walking up 3 flights of stairs
Uh-huh.
with a lot of groceries. And so I start with the very basic. Think up along the spine. The neck belongs to the spine so that the head is poised on top of the spine. The shoulders belong to the back, and the hips belong to the spine. And then with the shoulders and the hip part, I might have a thought or an image of the glenohumeral area and the hip joint socket.
Hmm.
And so the other thing I was going to say is that the neck, the connection of the shoulders to the back, and the connection of the pelvis to the back are the three of the very fascia-rich areas in the human skeleton.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they're like the almost the power centers and also the proprioceptive centers. And so I think that's probably why my nervous system responds to the simplified skeleton so clearly and
Mm-hmm.
so effectively over and over again. My nervous system doesn't seem to want to get tired of this one.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, that's also true of all of these new Alexander direction ideas. They don't seem they seem like they're very easy to use and pleasant to use, and people don't get tired of them. Which is
yeah.
anyway. Well, maybe we should end on this, and I can well imagine we might have a follow-up conversation to this at some point.
Yeah, because
Um,
it works extremely well with the center of gravity.
I would think it would, absolutely. So we may come back to this.
Mm.
But so my guest has been Mastena Nazarian, an Alexander Technique teacher in Melbourne, Australia. And we're going to put a link to her website. And if you have any questions about what we've been talking about, you contact her. We'll also put. I went
Actually, you have to
I slipped
contact
that
me
right by
again.
you there for a second, didn't I? And we'll also put a link to a website that has more information about the Alexander technique. Mastena, thanks so much for this.
Thank you very much, Robert.